Welcome to Mailbag. This is a series of videos about questions that you guys have left on the channel. I normally block them up into a series that I can record in an evening because that's how many questions you guys leave. So what you'll be seeing is this block header, and then you'll see the individual mailbag items that will follow as the next part of the video. But before we get into mailbag, which is about questions and answers and comments you guys leave on the channel, we must do the channel parish notices. And if you like videos about legacy tech, musical instruments, EDM, anything like that, hit the subscribe icon, because that's what this channel's all about. If you want to be notified when such videos hit the channel, it's the bell icon. Save yourself some time, hit both together. If you like the contents of the video, please give it a thumbs up. And also, I love you guys leaving comments on the videos down below. I read them, I comment on them, and sometimes you even give me ideas for future videos, which is really great stuff. It also allows other people to comment on something you've raised against a topic that was discussed in the video. Really, really good stuff. Also down there, Facebook and Instagram. Becoming more and more popular with you guys. A lot more of you are talking to me on those channels. Keep it up. It's probably the channel I'll respond to you most quickly on, because it's the channel in my pocket, as in it's on my phone. But please follow me on those particular platforms, and you'll see the normal channel shenanigans. And finally, down there is the important one. For less than the price of a cup of coffee, you can support the good work that this channel does towards EDM and legacy synthesizers. And now back to this video. This next question comes from Free State, and it's in response to the internals of the classic Yamaha SY85 video I did in August 2020. And he writes, "What's that got to do with the SY85? Except that both use metal contacts in the keyboard. These contacts work even today, as opposed to the graphite and rubber mechanisms which later ones employed." This was actually in response to somebody else's comment on that particular video, and I'm not going to deal with the other comment, because it was a comment that was actually relevant, but it wasn't relevant to the SY85. But the contact bit is quite relevant. And I'm afraid that the graphite and rubber keyboards were a sign of the time. It was cost cutting at the end of the day, and manufacturing simplification. The mechanical keyboards were very costly and expensive to make. A membrane keyboard could be produced for a fraction of the cost, which is why most manufacturers went down this route. As I say, you look at the components in a mechanical keyboard, and you look at the components in the silicon style keyboards. There is no comparison in terms of the amount of components for the mechanical to the graphite. So much less. But it was also a simple solution to the question of how hard do you hit the key. The graphite solution, or the membrane solution, could do this much simpler. And it did it by basically looking at the time strike between the two contacts. So if you ever looked at a graphite and a silicon solution, if you've ever taken that off, underneath it you effectively have two contacts, okay, and they're set slightly apart and they're set at slightly different heights, if you've ever looked at it. And the idea is that as you strike the key, those contacts make contact with their opposing pad on the circuit board at different times, and that tells the synthesizer how hard you've hit the key, and then it takes the timings, and that's effectively how it then plays the note, depending on what parameters you've got set on the keyboard. So you could have it so that if you hit the key hard, you play one tone, and if you hit it soft, you play another. That was a number of keyboards over the years you can set up like that. Anyway, Free State came back on this and said, yes, apparently then the faster process was responsible for detailing more or not. How could the mechanical contacts before determine the velocity otherwise except to check a delay between two contacts? And how if I play a very slightly slow depressed note, The info for the note pressed comes first at the last, and then info on the note at the highest determines the build-up. This should be similar for both keyboards, it's just different switches. Marketing of these awful cheap Fatar rubber keybeds that they were more responsive was probably only the better deduction time, no resolution. 2 switches do not check anything in between. There are some 3-switch rubbers developed by Fatar, though for the later pianos. Nord employs Fatar keyboards, as does Korg. I think Roland's Phantom range is also Fatar. They go into the they're going into junk in 10 years' time, like an out-of-date condom. No use to stack up the new rubbers nowadays because they wilt away in the same way. Okay, then 10 years later, if you plaster them into your old Nord nowadays, basically the mechanical is better than the rubber keyboards, and I suppose you could argue that. But I went back and said, okay, regarding the mechanical keyboards, I saw a keyboard many years ago in a trade magazine that employed a multi-switch environment. This made the keyboard so heavy, and I really do mean so heavy. The people reviewing it actually commented that you needed 2/3 people to move the 88-key keyboard because it was so heavy. Now, you know, the A80 I have is really heavy, but it's, you know, the keyboard is built like a tank on that particular keyboard, but that is still this style. Whereas, you know, all the parts and the machining you need for a mechanical keyboard just makes it heavy. You couldn't do this back in the day. You couldn't do this in rubber or plastic because the plastic just wouldn't take the pounding. Anyway. Basically, it employed this multi-switch environment that made the keyboard so heavy it really wasn't suitable for the portable market. So it was kind of more a fixed environment. I've had many keyboards arrive with dead keys that have required me to paint the contacts with graphite paint to make the contacts work, and that is typically the solution of how you get around this. The graphite has been worn away and is no longer making proper contact. So you just paint graphite paste onto the keyboard and let it set, and then just give it a slight rub down so it's flat. Whereas others are still in great condition. I have a Roland S50 in the workshop that requires the keyboard being stripped down and repaired. I've still got to do that. And I intend to video this repair process so others can see what needs to be undertaken. Other keyboards that I've purchased with the same age of keyboard work absolutely perfectly. You know, it depends on the life of the keyboard and how much of a life the keyboard has had. If it's been worked hard, it's been gigged, then, you know, the reality is that those keybeds aren't going to take the punishment. If it's had light studio work, I mean, a lot of these keyboards were bought by musicians to put in studios, and then they would have used something like an A80 as a master keyboard controller for a lot of the other synths so they used one keyboard controller, but they were effectively controlling the tones of another keyboard. In those situations, those keybeds would have got hardly any use, and therefore are still in really, really good condition nowadays. It's one of the things you always look for, you know, when you look at ads and people say studio use only. I always wonder when people say studio use only, is it really studio use only, or is it only studio use since you had it? The modern stuff I'd be more worried about, not from a keyboard perspective, but more the fact that manufacturers are now relying on the fact that to get the features and functions of the modern keyboard, you have to have it plugged into the USB port of a computer. And as we've just seen with the whole Catalina debacle, you know, manufacturers are starting to stop supporting USB drivers, and therefore that makes the keyboards obsolete far quicker than some of this legacy stuff that we've been debating in this question.